Welcome to Arts First. I'm Wendy Earle, and I'm pleased to be introducing this episode focusing on Tracey Emin's exhibition, A Second Life, which is currently running very successfully at Tate Modern in London. A retrospective of her 40-year career as an artist, it has received rave reviews and huge audiences. One of the things that struck me about the reception of this exhibition is how it shines a light on the way Tracey has transitioned from being one of the most shocking artists in the 1990s, relentlessly exposing her private life, most notably in the Turner Prize-nominated installation My Bed in 1998, to now being one of the most highly regarded of contemporary British artists, to the extent that she's been honoured with a CBE and a damehood, without compromising on her capacity to shock. So when Jean Wainwright, who is with me today, offered to do a podcast for Arts First about her, I leapt at the opportunity. Much of Emin's work seems to be focused very inwardly on her life and its trials. She ignores or disregards the separation between public and private in a way that can be deeply discomforting to the viewer. Indeed, much of her significance seems to lie in her exposure for her rather troubled private life to public view. Because of this, some people think she's hopelessly narcissistic, successful because she reflects the narcissism of our era. But others regard her as courageously breaking open a sphere that is all too often suppressed, where very personal anxieties, insecurities and experiences that many share are subject to intense levels of self-examination and self-expression. So to explore the significance of the impact of her work, I'm very pleased that Professor Jean Wainwright, art historian and critic, offered to do this podcast. A very special guest, her particular expertise in Andy Warhol. Her particular expertise is Andy Warhol, and she talked about an exhibition of his work in Milton Keynes for one of our early episodes. She's conducted interviews with Tracey Emin, and we're really grateful that she offered to come back to help us understand her work, the importance of this artist. Also with us is Dido Powell and Rachel Jordan, both practicing artists with an active critical interest in contemporary art and art history. Both have appeared on Arts First episodes before, and Dido is the leader of an informative and enjoyable series of tours in London art museums, which some of you may be familiar with. Jean will do a brief introduction to Tracey Emin and this exhibition, and then she and Dido will each introduce a selection of her works. I think how we've decided it will work is that Jean is going to focus on works from her early period and Dido on her more recent work, but we'll alternate them because there's a kind of an interesting conversation to have between about the works of the early period and the later period. Rachel and I may throw in a few thoughts and questions as we go along. And in the end, we want to have a wider chat about what makes Emin one of the most successful contemporary artists and whether her work might last into future generations. So without further ado, Jean, would you like to give us a quick intro?
Yes, so I think it's important to establish, of course, that Tracey Emin was born in 1963 in London, and she went to art school, Maidstone College of Art, where she achieved a first-class honours BA, and then subsequently went to the Royal College of Art, graduating in 1989, where she did her MA. And she was part of the YBA movement, or the Young British Artists, who emerged in the early 1990s. In 1997, her work, Everyone I've Ever Slept With, a tent appliqué with the names of allegedly everyone the artist had ever slept with, was shown at Charles Saatchi's Sensation exhibition in the Royal Academy in London. And she was subsequently nominated for the Turner Prize, which, although she didn't win it in 1999, generated a huge amount of column inches as she exhibited her work, My Bed, which is also in the current show. She represented Britain in the British Pavilion in 2007 at the Venice Biennale with her solo exhibition. Her work is in permanent collections and museums worldwide. And today, of course, we're going to discuss her current exhibition, A Current Life, A Second Life. Well, actually, it could be a current life as well, a current
Yes.
second life, a second life. Freudian slips were always quite interesting. Um, well, I thought I'd start with why I never became a dancer. The reason for that, it's a work from 1995. It was a work that, or is a work that you hear and resonates as you come into the show. You kind of hear the music playing in the background of it, or you hear a voice, depending when you enter, at what point you enter the museum. And it lures us with this, with its sound, and it's very powerfully narrated and actually very shocking what Emin is talking about. And I think that's part very much of what you were saying, Wendy, in the beginning. There's this element of shock, um, and somehow unapologetic recovery from events that actually could have caused huge harm, actually, if you didn't kind of, in a way, manage to overcome it in the way she did. She entered a competition, a dancing competition in Margate, and a group of boys hurled abuse at her, calling her a slag. And she realized she wasn't going to win the competition. And she talks about being 13 and 14 when she was abused by this particular group of boys, and how she got out of Margate and she escaped from there. And then we have the resounding tune of Sylvester's "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real," and she dances her way out of Margate. And for me, there's something, it's elevating in a way, her kind of expression of hope. But of course, it is a film, and it shows the power of perhaps something that was actually shot originally in Super 8 with this rather beautiful kind of image of Margate, which was less beautiful then than it is now, I must say. And then this overlaid narration. And Tracey's work is often about her voice as well. And I think that that very personal thing, that recovery, or that very personal narration, comes into her paintings as well. And I know, Dido, you've picked out some particular paintings that kind of relate to that very personal experience.
Yes, I actually, there was one painting that, yes, as you say, it relates to that experience, but I also thought it related to the dance video, though visually you might not see, the connection might not seem immediately apparent. So the picture that I was struck by was, I followed you to the end. So it includes writing, drawing, and painting, black, white, and red. And many of the pictures in the exhibition work on this very restricted palette of black, white, and red, and almost a demonstration of different ways of working. So the bottom half of the painting, you have writing with red paint slithering down in lines, dripping down over the writing, but the writing is integrated into the painting. And in fact, in an interview, somebody said, your handwriting's nice. And she very much liked her writing and saw it as an artistic tool similar to the drawing. So you have a figure centrally placed, her, a woman, and you have a face that's been marked out. So you have a smear of black paint covering most of the face, with extended sort of shooting out brushes showing her hair, and then some black shapes in the corner and overlaid paint, so that you can feel many layers. And it tells you about the act of painting, going over something, doing something, rubbing it out, going over again. And then the words look as though they're battling to have some order at the bottom of the picture. Well, this central figure, with black head, surrounded in red paint, looks like blood. And you talking about film, it instantly made me think of the shocking horror film Carrie that was made in 1976 with Sissy Spacek, novel by Stephen King. And many of the things that shocked people about that film totally touch on what Tracey Emin shocked people with: violence, underage sexual themes, religion as well, and sort of foul language about different body parts. In other words, language that would make you feel slightly nauseous. And Tracey Emin, in many of her pictures, is dealing with the idea of what's seeping out of the body, all the private bits that, you know, other people try and contain. But mainly as a painting done in 2024, it shows all this mixture of very, very free drawing, where you don't have to rub out a mistake, you keep going over it, and very loose way of painting, where everything underneath comes through, so you get a slightly ghostly image. So the sadness is as if the hair and the red pouring down the painting are coming down like tears. So it's sad, and then the message is very poignant, a message of love. I followed you to the end. And it looks almost as though she's in a white sort of evening dress. And it latches onto the humiliation in the film of Carrie, where she wins a prize and then blood is poured on her head. So I just thought it's the notion of humiliation, the same thing as dancing, thinking that you were really enjoying it, that you were feeling brilliant, you might have got a prize, and the humiliation of people yelling slag at you at the last minute. I just found that resonated, just to give it a bit of contemporary context.
Interesting. Jean, do you want to say something quickly, and then Rachel, if you want to?
No, Rachel, do continue.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I really liked the video Why I Never Became a Dancer. Maybe because I grew up in Essex, so there was that sort of, you know, and I'm not that much younger than her, and so I could slightly relate to that sort of teenage years of being a bit, you know, you're not in a capital city, you're just out in a province or a sort of sidelined kind of town, and you know, all these things go on amongst teenagers, and you know, one minute you're having a great time, next minute you're being pulled down by people that you wouldn't expect. And I suppose for me, although I totally appreciate what you said, Dido, there's a sadness and there's a sort of, you know, the humiliation is very real, but also I think as it's a retrospective, it really made me see how her ambition and her desire to escape really was so strong that she was able to, you know, she actually was able to. And I hadn't quite seen it in that way before.
I love
that. Yeah. So well, one of the things, I mean, I think that I love the film because of that sense of, I mean, obviously the horror of what she had to deal with as a young woman growing up in a small seaside town, and all the kind of, you know, horrible kids she had to deal with, and her experiences, her obsession with sex and her desire. I thought, you know, all of that, her desire for sexual experiences, her recklessness, if you like, but also her bravery and her kind of not being put down. And I think one of the things I found interesting about, and I think is a really useful one to introduce this episode with, is that sense that though there's a big emphasis on her victimhood, or appears to be a big emphasis on victimhood in her work, that's not what comes across in the film, or indeed a number of her works. It's almost, she's obsessed with herself, but she doesn't come across as somebody who just accepts that status of victim. And so I thought that was very interesting. But the thing I liked also about what both you, Dido, and Jean were talking about was the artistry of it, because I think the other thing I found quite that kind of dominates the responses is very much about the content of of her work, which is herself and is kind of, if you like, a kind of very narcissistic, but also doesn't really give perhaps enough credit to her artistry. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think that was a really great painting to choose. I think because for Tracey as well, there's always been this idea for her, the struggle of painting, you know. So one of the works that's in the exhibition, which actually is an installation, is called Exorcism of the Last Painting I Ever Made from 1996. And her actor painting has always been fraught with emotional hiatus for her, I think. And she was asked if she'd like to do a residency, living in a gallery, in the Gallery Andreas Brandstrom in Stockholm in 1996, where she'd be watched through peepholes. Now, there are various things in this, because the first thing, of course, is that the installation in the Tate, Tracey is not there naked and painting, just the residue of what she did, the clothes, the paints, the artworks are there. But what is really fascinating, I think, about it is what she actually said. So she said that Carl Friedman, her then partner, has suggested that because she didn't know what to do, so he said, well, when you enter the room, paint what you'd like to own. And I thought that was rather interesting. And she said, as I did the paintings, it made me think about artists and how they lived and worked. It was about being stripped, and it could have been about being vulnerable, but it wasn't. It became about the ego and the strength of the ego. This is from an interview I did with her in 2001. The strength as my failures were all amalgamated together. And it was called The Exorcism of the Last Painting I Ever Made because it was to get rid of them. Plus, you know, they were dominating ahead of all these other painters. And the fact that painting for me was just completely moribund, completely bound up with failure, painting, two things drawing together, which I wanted to separate. Because I liked painting. This is obviously back in 2001. I'm not a good painter, but I knew I felt like doing some paintings and I should do them and hold myself back and say, not hold myself back and say I can't paint or something like that. And then we get the person. And my nan had just died. So I was very upset and I needed to sort that out in my head. And I'm afraid of the dark and I detested my body. So there were things I wanted to get out of the way. And when Dido was talking about the painting just now, all those things of something happening to you, but somehow emerging from it, but being able to kind of exorcise it or get it out of your system. So she did Picasso. She said she hated Picasso. All that we got left in Picasso, if you look at the installation, is just a kind of bit in the middle. She kind of angrily paints over it. She loved certain artists, so she actually loved Edvard Munch, so she kind of did a homage to Munch, but she did kind of various different artists that she loved. Egon Schiele, she loved that work, and she kind of talks about the works that she loved and how she got through them. So I wanted Dido, because I know that other paintings that you've chosen are really express perhaps resonances of other painters that might be good to bring in here, because those works in that exhibition are so, there she is naked, painting, doing these artworks that are actually how to get other artists, how to solve problems of other artists.
Well, interesting you say that, because one of the pictures I've chosen was You Kept It Coming, which is a painting of her crouching naked. And in fact, just like the installation where there are many pictures of her naked from behind doing her art. This one is like that, but it's a position that is very double-sided. It's either a position of crawling along because you're being assaulted, and rather like a sort of a pig that's going to be slaughtered, you know, running off. Or at the same time, it's a woman twisting her body in a sort of middle of an act of sex where she's very active, she's participating, and she's enjoying it. So it has lots of the things that she speaks about, both delight and pleasure and pain, and the whole thing that she would rather feel pain than have numbness, that she wants to work with that hurt and do, you know, do something with it. And so I thought it was interesting because it absolutely isn't a victim painting, but she is actually, you see the naked body sort of crawling along, produced many broken lines, and her bottom is out as if, you know, she's going to be taken from the rear, sort of thing. But the head again is most peculiar. It looks as though it's been cut off the body. The head is a series of lines, and the face is facing down, and the lines again are sort of cutting through the body. But this notion of the head being separate from the body is a very powerful one that in fact goes back to, putting in an arts historical context, I mean, back to Manet's Olympia, where the little black ribbon around her neck cut her neck off from the body. And in a way, that's what offended everybody, is you had a personality coming through. You had a portrait on a nude. And this one is, it's very curious because she looks as though she could be crawling through mud. Again, the top of the picture is black, then there's an enormous white area, and the bottom of the picture is red, and it's all done in layers. And her description of how she painted, it would be work on something one day, then paint over it or wipe over it, and even paint some paintings that she would do, they'd be left half finished, and then she'd go back to them, some within 10 years, and work on them. But the drawing has a very agitated, scattered, sort of scruffy, sketchy quality, and it's on top of the layered paint. There's some sections of the smeared paint that make you think of Bacon, and then the body, this crouching body, makes you think of Bacon's very poignant picture of his lover dying over the lavatory. But I think she pushes back some of those comparisons because she's very quick to say that Bacon's stuff, well, actually that his studio was too macho because there was too much emphasis on lots of mess and lots of rubbish, because somebody came into her studio and said it didn't look like a painter's studio, it was too neat. But it's this business of the different ways of applying paint, the layers, so you get a ghostly thing, and the real refinement of some of the lines. And some of the lines on the body made me think of an exercise that can be done in many life drawing classes, where you're given a pen and you're supposed to pretend the pen is your finger, and you must not look at your paper, and you just move your finger as if you're carving the outside of a body, which means you never know when you've left a leg or you've gone to an arm. But usually those drawings get a very, very accurate and expressive sense of the movement in the body. And it has all that, and it has a certain freneticness. But the thing that I found mainly is you don't know whether she's being assaulted or she's tumbling and enjoying the whole thing.
Jean, did you want to come back on that, and then I'll ask Rachel?
Well, I think it's a very good choice, because this kind of crouching, which could be submissive, as you've said, Dido, or it could be other things, is something, you know, in the exorcism of the last painting, there's some photographs that accompany it where she's kind of in different poses, lying on the floor, crouching, etc. And that's something that she uses across many of her media, for example, her sculptures as well. And it always seems to be this, yes, this idea, as you're saying, of how we going to read that, the agitation of the paint and the way that she wipes out, as you say, she wipes out areas when she's not happy with it and returns to things, which I think are all very important. And the color palette, which of course you reference, which again is predominantly this black and red and white.
Rachel, what's your thoughts on this so far?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the paintings have that similarity in that they're ambiguous, or they can be read several very different ways, and I think that's a strength. And I was also interested in the exhibition. I was listening to the audio guide, and the guy Harry Weller, who's her studio manager stroke creative director, was commenting about how she lets the paintings emerge, which I think is really interesting because as an artist, that's I would like working that way myself, because it's not like she sits down and says, right, I'm going to do a painting about X, Y, and Z. She makes the marks and then she lets them speak to her, and then after that, then she works them further. So it was interesting to find out that is her process, and I think it's effective. Yeah.
I think that's another very good point, because Harry, her long-term studio manager, also curated the show. So she credits him as being the major curator. There were other people who assisted, of course, and the then director Maria Balshaw was obviously oversaw the whole thing. But she's very quick to say, and he's someone who knows her work very well. And she talks about as well the energy in her work, how she doesn't quite have all that energy now, because she used to work doing all these long sweeping paint gestures across the canvas from edge to edge. But now that takes almost too much out of her. And there's another one I know, Dido, that you've chosen that shows a little more how she's slightly changing, but there's so much energy in this still, absolutely. And the fact that she paints in acrylic, which I think is also interesting.
Well, that's a big thing, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the acrylic, she's doing with acrylic things that people don't think acrylic can do.
Yes.
Because most people think you get a flat surface with acrylic, and she's saying that mixing it with water, that is another struggle. When I was reading about her process, parts of it made a lot of sense, but there were other bits where I found I was slightly questioning it. The business of feedback, I mean, this is the sort of standard abstract way of working. You make a mark, it tells you what the next mark should be, you respond. So you don't have a preset idea and you work on it. But I was puzzled that if she was so immersed in her work, that she could be chatting to that chap and talking about it as she was going along. Because my thought was, actually, if you really immersed, are you going to keep chatting to somebody standing in your studio? So I found that one slightly odd. And there was some, I was very interested in what he said about the practical things of her work, but there were some sort of things that he wrote about her work that reminded me so much of the sort of mystification of the way Van Gogh worked, and the over romanticization of a sort of person who has no powers, if she's some sort of shaman with her work. So I felt that I didn't go for the whole feeling of she's an alchemist or shamanist or something, and she's making these things magically happen. I found that a bit old-fashioned, and just I didn't buy it really.
Oh,
I think.
Well, I suppose as an artist,
marvelous, but
yeah. Well, as artists,
is how people have spoken about it that then makes it a bit corny.
Right. But as artists, both you and Rachel must have that experience of when you're looking at something, a piece of work that you've done, and you kind of either feel like it's absolutely not working, or you feel like if you put a mark here or there, it'll pick it up in some way.
Yes.
So that she can't be that far off. I mean, I agree with the chattist side of things. I don't
yes,
know.
No, just that. No, she makes it right. And then often she says, no, something was wrong. Or he suggests something, she does it, and then she's furious with what he suggested, and she has to go back and rub it all out and do it.
Right, yeah.
But the rubbing out and the making of mistakes, but it's also interesting what Jean said about Picasso. She does a lot of things that this whole business of destroying, Picasso said it's a sum of destructions, painting, and then her saying, try and get rid of some of those painters in your mind, and that was exactly what Jackson Pollock said about Picasso. So lots of them are sort of just get rid of that person in your mind if you want to set yourself free to
I think you're right, but I think it depends what mood she's in, because she also talks in other interviews about not being able to sleep and getting up at 2 a.m. and suddenly feeling this huge creative urge and painting till 5, feeling an absolute, and at that point, Harry, I'm sure, isn't it with her at that point, certain of it. She's woken up and she's full of this creative energy, and she just makes the work. So I think, like many creative people, she probably has different creative moods. Sometimes she's kind of maybe problem solving, having washed out a lot of the work.
No, you're probably
so
right.
I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking.
Just a little thing that struck me. But
can I just move us on from the process a bit, because we haven't got a lot of time, and I just wanted to say a couple of things about the works themselves, because what you were saying earlier about how the works were made, the sort of like the brush strokes and the colors and all of that sort of thing, really, and also the references to the past, artists of the past, and the kind of the sense that Emin's work is rooted in her knowledge of art history and her love of art from the past. And yet you going and seeing her work, often the first reaction is to feel, oh my God, or, just sort of thinking, what is all of that about? Oh, what a mess. She can't draw. Or sometimes you think, yeah, well, actually she can draw, but, I still don't understand what she's drawing. And that response is something that I think is, for me, a major element of going to see her work, is just really not knowing how to grasp it. So I really appreciate the ways you both try to show that, that sort of sense about why the work in a way hits home. But I don't know, Rachel, whether you have any sort of thoughts on that sort of the reception. It's like almost how it is received and why her work at some level, though it doesn't have that kind of immediate aesthetic quality that some of us love about, the old paintings, even the modernist paintings, why it still has that kind of appeal where you, as you look at it, you can actually see stuff that maybe is, does it have an aesthetic quality, or is it just the rawness of it? I don't know.
That's quite a difficult question, actually.
Sorry.
I think, well, I mean, it's hard because are we talking only about paintings? Because obviously, like, the videos are completely different, and then the neon pieces are different. So if we talk about the paintings, I guess people who are used to looking at painting can relate in the sense that it's paint on canvas and she's using it in a highly expressive way. But the public reaction to the work around the time of sensation was, primarily in the newspapers when it was My Bed, and obviously that, that was the big question of the day, is this art? Is this art? And it's been relentless. And I asked it myself many times as well. And but you know, overall, I think seeing the show as a whole, it does, I think it makes sense. So it's being curated well. But also so when I was in there, I was trying to think about because I knew that Dido had picked these paintings. So I was looking at the paintings and I was trying to block out from my mind any knowledge of Tracey as a person and her myth and her celebrity status and her videos that I just watched that were really emotional and raw. So, and I was thinking, there's no way you can actually look at a painting of hers without, because we all know her to a greater or lesser degree. And so I personally, I think it's really hard to look at the paintings as a objectively, let's say. And
I think
then
there's also, sorry,
no, it's fine. It's fine. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say, because I'm really interested in what you said there, because there are lots of different bodies of work in the show, but in the paintings, there's this entanglement. You know, there's everything's, the hair's always tangled up, the kind of body, you get bits of the body and then it kind of gets covers in paint. So it's a kind of chaotic entanglement often, but it does draw you in. The scale is interesting as well. You know, you've got large scales, so you're kind of literally surrounded by these huge paintings. And I think as well, the colors, you know, red, as you say, you can't detach it from what's happened to her recently, her operations, the blood that's always kind of coming out of her often with her stoma. You know, there's all these different resonances. I agree, but there's a lot more than the paintings in the show. And for me, it was quite interesting that the paintings, the second half of the show was dominated by the paintings and sculptures, whereas the first half was more her applique blankets and her chair that she did her tour with, her nan's chair, you know, embroidered chair, and the videos, which are extraordinarily powerful still, you know, all these years later.
Yeah. So I suppose I think one point about the range of the works, you talked about the scale, but there's also the tiny, tiny works and her works in her writing. I mean, I find it quite interesting. Again, slightly bothersome about her diary pages being framed and that being, excuse me, part of an exhibition.
Yes.
And you think, how do I deal with this as a viewer? How do I deal with this? You know, do I read every word? What am I supposed to think about it? How am I supposed to respond? So I found that quite a challenge for the exhibition, is sort of, as an overall thing, I think it had a very strong impact on me. Individual works had various impacts. I didn't like the sculptures, I have to say, perhaps a conversation for another time. Some of the paintings I liked, but the tiny, tiny works, I thought, well, yeah, but I can't see them. That's kind of a little bit of my response. Just being a bit sort of a...
Are you talking... sorry, Wendy, are you talking about the works that were on the shelves, the teeny weeny
Some
ones?
of those, yes.
Because those were
the others, yeah.
Yes, they were the works that actually she destroyed, and then she did this little show, My Major Retrospective. So she made these tiny little reproductions, if you like, or tiny little resonances of the work that she had literally destroyed. And I rather like them, that you can't see them awfully well. That's certainly true.
But it's quite odd to have the first room of an exhibition as a room that you can't see the work. This is the thing. I thought they were very beautifully arranged and they looked marvelous, but you know, obviously with writing, you're invited into the text and you can't read them properly. And they are very beautiful, but it was slightly odd to have that as how you enter an exhibition. So you enter and you immediately have to stand still and start trying to read it. I found that slightly awkward.
I suppose because writing's always been part of her art, that kind of diaristic aspect, that's would have been the, I guess, the rationale, you know,
Yes.
these diaries writing what happened to her when she did her tour with her chair. There's a lot of money in chairs. They were actually, she was reading out those pages, you know, which pretty
Right.
terrible kind of things in some of
Mm.
them. But again, she was reading them out to kind of not only share them, but to kind of get rid of them in a way. But there, yes, you're right. I mean, some of them are, you have to look really close to decipher them. Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
That's what
So,
you mean.
so just maybe just to move on to the final kind of few minutes, I wanted to ask about her appeal now. Why is she such a successful artist now? What is it that makes her so successful? Is there a kind of you know, is she reflecting the age back to us, the narcissism of the age back to us? Is there something maybe a little bit voyeuristic about people's appreciation of her work? You know, what's going on there? And then the other question is her work, does her work have a future? You know, apart from being in the basements, the storerooms of museums in the future for returning to periods of art history, will it have an ongoing appeal, I wonder? Or is it too unmediated? Is it too much about the personal and the present to really have that kind of ongoing appeal? I know we can't read into the future, so it's just a matter of really people, you know, having a kind of sense of why is it, you know,
I would
so
have
successful?
thought it would lead into the future precisely for the very fact of the personal, because you know, people can't, it's easier to zoom in on the human than to immediately connect to a context that you don't know. So I personally think, out of lots of the artists of that period, some of her work definitely will go into the future. And I think that the whole business of her saying in the second life, the big difference is that she's very disciplined, and she's very she knows what she's doing, and she wants to paint, and she has a lot to say, and she's got this strong feeling of time. And she definitely, yes, that the intensity of the feeling that this is something that she now very much wants to do. And as Jean said earlier on, she'd say painting is so difficult. I think some people who thought she was, you know, a bit of a joke or a bit of a gimmick, that they think, wow, you know, she's got to this age, she's been through all these things, and rather than slowing down when she's got every excuse not to work, she's flipped the whole thing round, and she's pushing forward with great vigor, and also more reflection, and quite a bit of, yes, there's a bit of spiritual stuff going on there as well. So I think some people who might have dismissed her might think, well, actually, she's not a flash in the pan, she's carried on, and this clearly is her life. And that notion of being committed to something that nobody's made you do, and also in the age of artificial intelligence, then what have you got but the individual? So I think her individuality will be something that people could latch onto. Maybe completely wrong, don't know.
Yeah, Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sort of go along with what Dido says. I mean, I think that's what struck me seeing the exhibition more than I would have felt about her work in the past, is the fact that she has shared, you know, because she has shared everything with us. You know, you can't deny her humanity. And that's actually quite rare, because a lot of those artists from the YBA period, you know, they're still doing things that are sort of more cool and conceptual and intellectual. And she's sort of, you know, the whole exhibition is premised by or prefaced by saying, you know, you've got try and be open to feelings as you see the show. And so I thought that was really interesting. And in terms of longevity, then Actually, for me, I was just thinking about her as someone from Margate, a working class background, who's now got a retrospective in the Tate. And even in those pure, simple terms, that is actually a success. And I think that she has got there on her own merit,
Yes.
It's in the beginning, yes, she had, like the other artists who were in the Sensation show, there was Charles Saatchi backing them. And I think that's the one thing in the story I would have liked to be included. The fact that, being patronized, as in receiving significant financial support at the start of your career, does make a difference. And but she wasn't, like you said exactly, Dido, she wasn't a flash in the pan. And also I think it's easier now to see what she's about, because at the time there was that strong push to being, the shock value of a lot of the work. And I think it got, what she was doing was sort of not so clear because of all the other context. Whereas now I think it's easier to see what she's about. And
and also we're not so easily shocked, but she always said she wasn't intending to shock. Her tent, of all the people she slept with. I mean, I remember as when I was younger, that lots of female artists giggling, saying, "Well, if I sleep with a lot of men, will that make it? Then I'll become famous." It's a sort of, and then the irony is, she said, "Oh, the tent is not about her; it's about us to look at and say what we feel." But I just thought how funny that there were those sorts of jokes as, right, I know what I can do to become famous.
Well, I think, I think all the points you're making are very valid, because I think it also does reflect the times when she was emerging. There was still a lot of prejudice against what she was doing. She, was part of that generation of artists that were taking on a laddishness, but she also dared to do work that, like How It Feels, 1996, really documenting a really awful abortion and putting it out there, accompanying it with drawings, those kind of things. And I think that are still very, very, relevant and touch a lot of people. In terms of her future longevity, I think definitely she will last. But I do think what you said about what you both were talking about, how it resonates now, I think is important. And as a moment, as capturing certain moments in history, certain moments, how the press wrote about things. There was no doubt that her being, 1999 stomach turner was a headline when she was, nominated for the Turner Prize. She slept with everyone in Margate. These were kind of headlines about her work. And they promoted her. These were in the press that was kind of promoting and pushing her out. But also, Rachel has said something very important, I think, about support. So she had, she is represented by top galleries. She was picked up by galleries like White Cube that certainly promoted her career. She was picked up by Saatchi. That did make a big difference, I'm sure. But she also was and is incredibly focused on what she wanted. She knew that she wanted to make it, and she continued to make work and change work. She didn't I don't know, had a discussion earlier. She didn't, when she made her applique blanket, she could have gone on selling those that were hugely successful. She didn't. She challenged herself to move into other media. So I think that is important. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, because reading about Tracey Emin before we started the podcast and sort of just doing a bit of background reading, I, was struck by she's very much a Marmite, if you like to sort of use that cliche, artist. And, you know, there are still people who hate her for her, I think primarily for the content of her work, for her kind of reflecting back the kind of narcissism of society, which some of us, you know, find very difficult to deal with or to appreciate. But I think her, I think also the other thing, you know, there is a difficulty in looking at her work. You know, it has this immediate impact in some cases, but also some of it is actually not particularly beautiful, intentionally not beautiful. I mean, I think it'll take me a long time to like her bronze sculptures on the whole.
I like them.
So, you know, that's a further discussion to be had. But I think that's, and I think that's the thing about actually an artist who can keep moving on, as you said, Jean, and who somehow captures the moment in a way that really attracts a lot of people. You know, she's not a minority interest. She's not a specialist art world interest. Somehow, you know, she is loved well beyond the art world. And I think that's all credit to her. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I thank you all for joining in and giving your views and giving your knowledge and expertise. And I hope the listeners enjoy it as well. And I meant to say earlier, I'll be trying to put as many images as possible on the Art First podcast Substack page.
Thank you for listening to Arts First. You can subscribe for free and listen to all of our episodes at our Substack website. You'll find that at artsfirst.uk. There you'll find relevant links, images, programme notes and other resources, and of course our donations page. You don't have to sign up for access, but if you do, you'll be kept informed of new episodes and articles as they come out. You can also listen to episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and on our YouTube channel. If you like what we do, enjoy our podcasts, agree with some of our concerns on freedom of expression in the arts, for example, then we'd really appreciate any support, ideas and feedback. Tell your friends, share our episodes, sing our praises on social media. But for now, many thanks and we'll see you next time.